Time once again to enter the strange world of the unexplained. And tonight, I want to take you to an old house on the borders of Lancashire and Yorkshire. The house itself is very large, built from local stone and set in about an acre of grounds. It's unoccupied now, the last owners having moved out only 8 months ago. But more of that later. This strange tale began some 12 years ago when the then owner of the house, an old couple in their twilight years, were wakened one night by the sound of furniture being dragged across the sitting room floor. I should explain that the floor was polished wood, so anything moved across it would make quite a noise. Anyway, the time was 1:45 a.m. Thinking that they had burglars, the old man put on his dressing gown and, arming himself with a stout walking stick, went downstairs to investigate. As he approached the sitting room, the noise seemed to get louder. Steeling himself, the old man suddenly thrust the door open and switched on the light. But there was nothing there. The room seemed just the way it had been when the couple had retired to bed the previous night. Bewildered and not a little unnerved, the old man began to look around, just in case anyone was hiding. But he found nothing. He turned to go out of the room again, when suddenly he caught the sight of a movement in the corner of his eye. He whirled round and was just in time to see someone, or something, disappear behind the settee on the far side of the room. He called out to the person to show themselves immediately, as he was going to call the police, and there was no way that he could get away. But as you would expect, there was no reply. So, nervously, he approached the settee and looked behind it. And what he saw turned his blood to ice. Because crouching on the floor was the small figure of... he didn't know what. It looked like a dwarf, but it wasn't. In fact, it wasn't like anything he had ever seen before. It seemed oblivious to the fact that it had been found, and continued to crouch on the floor, absolutely immobile. The old man slowly and fearfully reached down to prod the thing with the walking stick that he was carrying. And as he touched it, he found himself confronted with what he later described as the most absolute manifestation of hate he had ever seen or experienced. The thing looked slowly up at him, and now the man saw it in all its horrible detail. It was like a small, hairy man, almost like a monkey, but definitely not a monkey. It had strong legs, which at this time were tucked underneath it, and small but muscular arms ending in a hand, which only had 3 fingers. His head was almost too large for his body, and was also very hairy. But the most frightening thing about it were his eyes, for they were like pinpoints of deep red light shining unnaturally out of the dark face. They seemed to pulsate with hatred, and the old man was sure that he saw little darts of red light, like sparks, shooting out of them towards him. To say he was frightened would be an understatement, but as is so often in cases like this, the man's reaction was one of anger at the thought that his privacy had been invaded, rather than self-preservation. So he told the thing to stand up slowly and to come out from behind the settee. Uttering a low growl in its throat, it did as it was told. And now the man could see that it was about 3 foot 6 inches high. But it had made no attempt to come from behind the furniture. It just stood there, growling. So the man prodded it again with his walking stick, and at this, the thing seemed to rear up until it towered above the man. It then grabbed the stick with one of its hands, and a sharp sensation, like an electric shock, struck the man on his arm. A bright blue flash shot out from the stick, and the thing disappeared, leaving behind it an awful smell of burning. The old man was shocked, to say the least. When he'd recovered, he looked around the room, but it was empty. There was no sign that there had been anything there, except for the lingering smell. The old man decided that it would be wise not to tell his wife what he had seen, in case he frightened her. The truth is that he was not really sure that he actually had seen anything, although he found it hard to dispute the evidence of his own eyes. So he returned to bed and told his wife that it had been nothing. The next day, the man examined the sitting room from top to bottom, but found no sign of a break-in or any evidence that the thing had been there. Until he looked behind the settee, that is. For there, on the floor, was a dark patch, like a burn mark. Nothing happened for a few days, and then about a week after the incident, it happened again. The sound of furniture being dragged across the sitting room floor woke the man from a light sleep, again about 1:45 in the morning. Once again, the man went downstairs, but this time armed with his shotgun. Before he opened the sitting room door, he instinctively knew what to expect. And sure enough, there in the middle of the room, he saw the figure of the small thing. It was just standing there looking at him, almost defying the man to make a move. Raising the shotgun to his shoulder, the old man challenged the thing to identify itself, not really expecting a reply. But much to his surprise, it spoke to him. In a low voice which was more a growl than a human voice, it told him that it had been called to the house and was not going to leave. The man asked it what it was, but all he got in reply was a name he didn't recognize. Despite asking for an explanation, he still didn't understand. He then challenged it to go and never return, but he was told that that wasn't possible, that it was there to stay until it had fulfilled its task, although it didn't say what that task was. And then he did something which was to change the old man's life forever. It seemed to crouch slightly, and then leap at the man with a speed which defied a natural explanation. It landed on the old man's shoulder, but not before he had a chance to loose off a shot from the gun he was carrying. The shot definitely hit the creature. It made no difference, though. It just went through it and landed on the wall on the other side of the room. The creature came to rest on the man's back and seemed to cling there like ivy. Fear made the old man struggle, but to no avail. The thing clung there like glue, and nothing could dislodge it. By now, the sound of the shot had made the man's wife come downstairs, and she burst into the living room. Looking at her husband rolling about on the floor, her first thought was that he had had a seizure. But then she noticed something on the man's back. And when she tried to prise it from him, it gave her an electric shock. And then, just as suddenly as all this happened, the thing disappeared in a flash, once again leaving behind it a horrible smell. When the man had recovered, he told his wife what he had experienced. At first, she didn't believe him, but the evidence of her own eyes couldn't be denied. From this moment on, their fortunes changed. The man seemed to become stooped and bent, and when asked by his doctor what the symptoms were, he said it was like a great weight pressing on his back. No medical tests could discover the cause of the man's discomfort, and after a period of nearly 12 months, he died of exhaustion. The man's widow sold the house, and new people moved in. But within 6 months, the new owner was struck down by a mysterious affliction, which left him almost doubled over and complaining that it felt as if a weight was pressing on his back. And within another year, he also was dead from this strange affliction. And so it went for the next 3 owners, each one ending up the same way. As you would expect, very soon rumors began to spread about a mysterious curse on the house. And some 4 years ago, I was asked to investigate to see if I could find out what the problem was. One of the first people I talked to was the widow of the old man, from whom I got the story I've just told you. And I spent several nights in the house. And I can say now, in fact, for the first time publicly, that I saw the strange creature for myself, although I must add that I had taken suitable precautions beforehand. And I recognized the name which was given to me. It was that of an elemental, a creature of the lower order, which can manifest itself when commanded to do so, and which will attach itself to whoever it is commanded to do so. But why it has attached itself to the owners of the house, and why it manifested itself in the first place, I don't know, and I can't seem to find out. But I suspect that something happened on the site of the house before it was built, which bound the elemental to that particular spot, probably for all time. If that is the case, then if you are looking for somewhere to live, and you're offered a large stone house on the borders of Lancashire and Yorkshire at a low price, beware. It might just be this unhappy house. The elemental is dormant at the moment, but it's ready and waiting to reawaken and perhaps claim another hapless victim.